Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session. A very important question for today's session is, what enables true change? We'll be exploring this question from an ecological perspective, and my guest for today will share from his extensive knowledge and experience, but most of all, he will be leading a process to demonstrate that this actually helps to disrupt old patterns and create new possibilities. So very exciting. And his name is Stuart Hill. Professor Stuart Hill is Foundation Chair of Social Ecology at the University of Western Sydney. At the university, he taught units on qualitative research methodology, social ecology research, transformative learning, leadership and change, and sustainability. Leadership and change. And he retired in 2009, and now he is emeritus professor in their School of Education. His PhD in the 60s, when it started, was one of the first whole ecosystem studies that examined community and energy relationships. And it was also the earliest such study conducted by one single researcher. Stuart has published over 350 papers and reports, and he also wrote books or co-authored books. And his latest ones are Ecological Pioneers, A Social History of Australian Ecological Thought and Action, together with Dr. Martin Mulligan, Learning from Sustainable Living, Psychology of Ecological Transformation, together with Dr. Werner Setman-Fries, and Social Ecology, Applying Ecological Understanding to Our Lives and Our Planet, together with Dr. David Wright and Dr. Catherine Camden-Pratt. Now, since 2003, he has contributed groundbreaking chapters to 9 books related to social ecology, organic farming, and sustainable agricultures, industrial ecology and spaces of innovation, social capital and sustainable community development and learning, and transformation ecology. In Canada, he was a member of over 30 regional, national, and international boards and committees. He is currently the editorial board of 5 international referred journals, and until 2004, he represented professional environmental educators on the New South Wales Council on Environmental Education. Stuart has worked in agricultural and development projects in the West Indies, French West Africa, Indonesia, the Philippines, China, the Seychelles, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. His work in the Seychelles to make a whole Coraline Island completely self-sufficient in food and energy is particularly significant. His background in chemical engineering, ecology, soil biology, ethnology, agriculture, psychotherapy, education, policy development, and international development, and his experience of working with transformative change has enabled him to be an effective facilitator in complex situations that demand collaboration across different and long-term co-evolutionary approaches to situation improvement. And that is rightfully so, a whole mouthful. So I'm very honored that he's here. I would like to say a very warm welcome to you, Stuart. Thank you so much for being here in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
It's my pleasure to be chatting with you today, Jennifer.
And so we are going to have a conversation about an important question, and that is, what enables change? And we're not only going to talk about it, but we're also going to go through a process amongst which many other processes that you developed and researched in interaction with people to disrupt something old and really enable something new. And so could you share with us, first of all, what is the ecological study of things, and why is this angle or this approach so important when we want to really enable true change?
Well, I tend to think of ecology as the study of the relationship between everything and everything. And what makes that so important is there's constantly an awareness of taking into account all the factors involved. And my experience with a lot of processes that people are engaged in is that they're only looking at a little fragment of the picture. And so they do a study and they come to a conclusion, and then sometime later somebody else does another study and shows that it's not quite so. And it's usually the case that they didn't take into account some of the key factors that were involved. So ecology enables us to make sure you keep asking, is there anything else involved? Is it a personal factor, a social factor, an ecological factor? Is it something that's in the immediate environment, in the distant environment, and so forth? And I think that's particularly the gift of ecology, is it's got a wide angle lens, and it also has a fairly deep way of engaging with whatever's going on.
So you're actually saying ecology is important because if we have a narrower lens, so to speak, then we have the tendency to leave out angles, information that could be crucial in our change endeavors. And the ecological is a much wider lens that enables us to look at the bigger picture of what we're actually dealing with. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, that's exactly the case. I grew up in England, and the image I always have in my mind, having been taken by my parents to places of historical interest, was visiting those early English castles that had little slits in the walls for people to shoot arrows through. And it's always seemed to me like a lot of what's going on is viewing a situation through a similar little narrow slit. And there's a reason why that's attractive, because in leaving out all the complexity, it makes the study easy to do, but at the same time, it makes it increasingly irrelevant.
Yeah, that's something that I really recognize. I love the analogy with being in the historic building and seeing you and discovering this analogy when we're talking about change and the narrow focus that we sometimes have. It reminds me of that funny story about one person asking another person what they were doing on the floor, and they're saying, "I'm looking for my keys." And they're saying, "Well, where do you think you lost them?" And they're pointing at something yards away. And they're saying, "Well, why are you looking here?" And they say, "Well, because there's light here." And it seems like a similar thing. Sometimes we narrow things down so much because it makes things easier and less complex. But in doing so, we may completely miss the point of what we're trying to research or discover or solve. Yeah.
I've always loved that story.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it as a cartoon. It sort of popped up in my head just now when you shared your metaphor for the narrow view of things. And you have such a long and extensive experience when it comes to using this ecological lens. And could you share with us what are your key findings or principles or things that you discovered when we are really looking at creating a sustainable life or learning or changing or all those evolving type of processes and the impact that this ecological lens has on all our human systems, organizations or countries or however you want to frame it. What are your key principles from that?
Well, I think one of them is that we've got to look at humans in the same way as I in those days was looking at other species.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at other species, I basically ask 4 questions. How many are there in the population? what are they doing, how are they distributed, and how supportive is the environment. And so in some ways that opens up the imperative to ask those same questions of us, not so much as how many, but what is an optimum number in our population? How shouldn't we distribute ourselves, and what shouldn't we do? And what's our relationship with the support environment? And it's very clear very quickly to understand that if you have high numbers that are highly aggregated with a consumptive lifestyle in an environment that is being degraded, it's unlikely that we can continue as a species. Yeah. So we've got to manage our population numbers, distribute ourselves more close to the resources that we need in smaller aggregations, and we need to conserve a lifestyle, and we need to conserve the environment that's supporting us. Yeah. And in all of those areas, they're contested areas politically, and areas that we still haven't come to grips with and acknowledged as important. And we're still voting on the basis of growth and personal gain and individualism and so forth. So we've got a long way to go as a species to acknowledge what we've actually got to take responsibility for. Yeah.
And so, so if I understand you correctly, you say, when I look at how we learn, how we evolve, how we can live sustainable lives, in different groups, you say these 4 questions are an indication of our possibilities for sustainable life, and are pointers. The answers are also pointers towards enhancing the well-being of the entire species, but also of the ecosystem around us, and that we are such a big part of.
Absolutely. So I think that's a key part of it, is recognizing that we're part of that total ecosystem, and caring for that ecosystem is actually a way of caring for ourselves. Yeah. Where if we just focus on ourselves, regardless of the ecosystem, we end up destroying the ecosystem, and we have no support system for ourselves.
Yeah. So, so when we look at this, then, because we don't find ourselves in a very good place as a species. I mean, we've had climate change discussions for decades, and it seems like we're not making any progress. And again, seems, because I don't really know. I don't know if we have the wider lens on that topic. But still, what is it then that could actually enable true change in that? Because if we are all inclined to focus on growth and more profit and individualism, and what is it that's actually going to elicit this shift, this change, so that we are more supportive of our own sustainability and our own thrivability as a species? Because it's not just that we depend on the ecosystem also depends on us. And so it needs to start somewhere. So what is it that's going to be the onset for that? Or, what starts to change, in your opinion?
Well, I think there are 3 things that determine what we do moment to moment as an individual. One of those is our genetics, and our experiences from sort of pre-birth to early childhood. And and that defines our potential. I mean, if you're born without legs, you're not going to be a runner. And
Yeah.
so there's some of those factors that are important. The second factor are our past experiences. And for most of us, we had fairly challenging past experiences. If you look at, for example, birth in a so-called primitive society, birth from beginning to end takes on average about 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what physiologically a human being is adapted for in terms of our physiology.
Mm-hmm.
In our industrialized society, the average birth takes about 7 hours.
Yeah.
So if you were designed for a 20-minute experience and you have to survive a 7-hour trauma,
Mm-hmm.
we're pretty well all born traumatized in our industrialized society.
Mm-hmm.
And unless we go through some process of recovering from that, we carry that trauma with us throughout our lives. So you can understand why people choose to be cautious and are a bit afraid and have difficulty changing their opinions about things because it means a risk and so forth.
Yeah.
And being completely open and honest about things because, you become vulnerable. You might become vulnerable. So that past experience is an important thing to think about, and so
Yeah.
that's why doing some psychological, psychosocial sort of recovery work is quite important, and it provides an opportunity for transformation and change. And the third factor is the nature of the present environment.
Yeah.
If the present environment is rewarding you for maintaining the behaviors that are getting us all into trouble, then it's going to be very difficult to bring about a change. So changing the reward system and the availability of supports and caring for one another and so forth, all those sort of present environment factors are equally important to the recovering from factors through the influencing factors from doing psychosocial or psychological recovery work. And I think that's, for example, an example of an ecological approach is actually saying, well, there are three factors involved, whereas somebody who's promoting psychology may say, well, all you have to do is to sign up for the services I'm providing as a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
Or a politically motivated person may say, all we've got to do is change the politics.
Yeah.
That all this psychology stuff is rubbish. Well, they're all important factors to take into account.
Yeah.
And I think the genetic one is the difficult one to talk about, just as euthanasia is difficult for many people to talk about, and and choice about such things.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that at birth, historically, a selection process was going on, and some babies didn't survive. And now we keep babies alive that would have previously died. And the downside of that is that we're perpetuating genetic material that is not as high quality as the babies that were selected out naturally through a survival process. And so we're, in a sense, burdened as a society with an enormous amount of limited genetic material. And it's a difficult thing to talk about.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a very difficult thing to talk about because, for one, genetics is not something that you can influence much during your life. for one. So, and then there's this whole moral and ethical aspect of, well, who are we to judge whether a baby should live or die? And there is a lot of tension around death. Actually, there's a lot of tension around abortions, or even on the other end of the spectrum, when people actually feel
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm done with my life now, I want to end it.
Yeah.
And there's this whole thing around, are people allowed to actually do that or have a say in that? And then there is during life, where there's suicide. So I'm also like, there's this natural thing that happens with almost any species when the genetic material is not good. But we have this sense of morality, or of ethics, or of this conscious thought process that overrides the instinct of leaving a baby that's not very healthy, that was just birthed into the world, and saying, okay, well, and animals can do that. They just select out the healthy ones, and the not so healthy ones they leave behind to die. And so, I can imagine that it's a very difficult thing to talk about. But what I also hear you say with these three things is that actually, from the beginning, there is these narrowed down viewpoints in terms of, okay, where should we look for change, or where's the key for change, and that's where it already splits up. Yeah.
It's absolutely correct. And even people considering things under the heading of morality, there's still a tendency sometimes to look through that narrow slit window at certain aspects of morality. And until we're able to see the bigger picture and even be more comfortable actually talking about these sort of factors and doing something about them, it will be not a holistic morality. It will be still a morality that's adaptive, in the same way as the child has to survive the traumatic experiences that we have as we grow up. So it's an interesting dilemma we face.
Yeah. And so we are talking about what enables true change, and we take the wider lens of ecology, and the questions that you mentioned, but also the three different aspects that come about to actually see what lies at the core of this change, and how can we do that. And it requires that we have difficult conversations, obviously, because we are so away from the natural rhythm that many other species, or almost all species, have in their ecosystems. And so what I'd like to ask you is, and I know this of you because you sent it to me before we actually have this conversation, and that is that there are some testing questions where you can see where there is genuine improvement, or genuine progress, or genuine change. And I think that could be really interesting for everyone who's watching. And maybe these can also support having the more difficult conversations, but having a more holistic or more ecological view on how are we really going to change. And so could you share a bit more about these testing
Well, I think, in the same way as looking at things broadly in an ecological framework, in that sense, I think there are some personal factors which in some ways, you could see it in terms of personal capital.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, you know, how are the things we do affecting our personal capital, which would be seen as our personal well-being and our capability to do things and to be in the present and be spontaneous. And those are sort of indicators in a sense, and they contrast with the opposite of all those things of having eroded personal capital, not being in the present, being with limited awareness and disempowered, and so forth. So all those personal capital things would include things like awareness and clarity in terms of vision and values and awareness and empowerment.
Yeah.
There's social and cultural capital, and so real indicators of that capital in society. Yeah. And probably the most powerful indicator is trust. Is people say, you know, when they move to some ideal place, they say, oh, it's just such a great place. I can just trust everybody I come in contact with, which I didn't feel when I lived in so-and-so, you know. Yeah. So those are sort of indicators, and of course there are many other indicators. And one of the things that contrasts with is the primary indicator that we use at the moment is economic growth and money as the indicator. And that is the thing that's getting us into trouble, is that it's not that money is a bad thing. It's quite a useful thing, but it's only a useful thing if it's enabling us to achieve things that are more important than money. Yeah. If it's used to influence money, then money is just a tool. It's an implement. It's not. It's like you know, praying to the hammer or the screwdriver. Yeah. You know, it's something that we've and the reason, part of the reason why we're caught up in this situation is tied up with our personal disempowerment. Yeah. And so when we're disempowered, we're likely to choose indicators that are that we perceive as more powerful than us, and it's very easy to see money as more powerful than us. Yeah. So we've got to. That's why psychological work to reclaim our power is really important. Yeah. The third one is the environment, and that's where natural capital and the capability of the environment to function is really important. And what is really key there for humans is acknowledging that we have a responsibility for maintenance of that environment. And at the moment, we tend to manage the environment to achieve productivity of a product that we want. And so the people who work with the environment are rewarded for the productivity that comes out of it, not the maintenance of the environment. Yeah. Yeah. So in a way, that understanding leads to a reflection that, wow, maybe we need to start finding ways to reward maintenance. And it's a very important thing in terms of society, because a lot of maintenance historically in human societies was carried out by women, unpaid and assumed. Yeah. And so achieving gender equity and equity in our society is very much tied up with the recognition of the importance of rewarding and taking care of maintenance. Yeah, yeah. And then there are, you know, a few other sort of general factors that are associated with that. Yeah. one of the key factors for me is that most of what is unknown, and it's tied up with mystery and experience. You know, if you want to make a decision about things, somehow you've got to tune into the whole of the picture, most of which is unknown.
Yeah.
And the way you can tune into that is not limiting it to the minuscule little known bits, which we tend to do now. We talk about evidence-based decision making, and have we got the data from the study?
Yeah.
Well, all the data in the world is still only dealing with less than 5% of what's going on.
Yeah.
So we've actually got to become better at relying on experience and intuition and a sense of the whole in making our decisions.
Yeah.
And another one of those sort of general factors that are things to consider when we're deciding things.
Yeah, yeah. So what you're actually saying is that these testing questions or areas for genuine improvement and genuine change is that, as you were talking, I see it in front of me as these nested systems. There's the personal capital, and then which is all about your own well-being, and then there's the social capital, where instead of trust, we have more powerful tools, or perceived more powerful tools, to be an indicator of how well we're doing. And actually, it's the thing that you cannot put a price tag on, which is trust, that could be a much more helpful indicator of how well-being is in that realm. And then there's the bigger system again of the environment and the ecosystem, and where it's about how do we deal with the well-being, or our role in the well-being of the bigger whole, of which and then there's another layer of which a lot is actually unknown. So the environment is still in the realm of where we think we know, and then there's the space of the not knowing or the unknown, and your invitation is for us to actually take that into account when and not to be really focused and I was going to say obsessed with the known, because being obsessed with the known is about having that sense of control again. And maybe that ties back into the personal again, where we feel disempowered. So trying to counterbalance this feeling of disempowerment, it has this ripple effect in all the other layers and how we perceive them and deal with them. So genuine improvement is very much about focusing on those, and also focusing on what's not known, and how we can create well-being while relating to the unknown. That's what I hear.
I think one of the ways to think about it is, and it was somebody who drew it as a very powerful image. He drew a great big circle, and he put a dot in the circle. And the dot in the circle he labeled as the sum total of human knowledge.
Yeah.
And the great big space around it was the unknown. Well, the dot we engage with through cleverness, and that's what we measure in exams in schools and qualifications and so forth. The big space is I like to think of as engaged with through wisdom.
Yeah.
And so it's, for some people, that unknown area is linked to spirituality, which is a fine concept if it's kept sacred to the unknown. What's happening in our society, again, because of fear and being driven to control and so forth, much of this realm of the spirit has been taken over by religions.
Yeah.
And again, it's another very dangerous areas to dare to talk about. But in the process, that area of mystery and wonder and unknownness and surprise and so forth has been reconstructed as a pseudo-known.
Yeah.
And so a religious leader will say, well, I know about this, and this is how it is, when actually it's just like another business selling another product that it is in competition with other products. And so you'll see different religions will say, no, ours is the real religion and this is the fake religion and so forth. Whereas when you stand back from it all, what makes that area actually valid is what's common to all of those people's statements about the spiritual area. So the things that differentiate all those religions is the pseudo stuff, and the essence of spirituality is the bit that's common to all of them.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to sell your product, that's not what you're going to say. You're going to say, no, you know, the packaging is what's the important thing. So it's an area like the genetics area we talked about earlier that's quite a dangerous area, and people sign up to these things partly to find a safe space, to be able to not be fearful in the world and be reassured by these people selling these products that you're right if you're a member of this group, you know, and so forth. So it's very seductive to do that, and it's incredibly courageous to maintain a sense of spirituality that is not co-opted and packaged as a known when it actually is unknown.
Yeah. So what I actually also hear you say in this example is that it's very important for us to see what's real and what's packaging, but it's also about the exercise of being with the unknown. Because if you look at what's common in the religions, then that's still something that's known, or that at least has something that you can give words to, but you'll never actually know.
No, I think it's keeping that space open for surprise and discovery. You know, it's like being fully in the present. It's not that you're not able to engage with what's coming next or reflect on what's happened in the past. But to actually be fully in the present, you actually have to let go of over focusing on the past and the future.
And
so it's interesting that many religions have people over focusing on the future by talking about the afterlife. And so as long as you're focused on afterlife, you're not actually fully in the present.
Interesting.
Slippery stuff.
And so wow, there's so many different places we could take this conversation next, because I also find that very interesting about being, if you're focused on the afterlife, then what is the quality of your life as you're living it now, because you're not actually in it. But I want to continue with the piece you said about the exploration and being in the now and being in the present. And because we set out to do an exploration in our conversation today also, because we are exploring what enables change. And you've been speaking to that from an ecological perspective and what your findings are in that. But you're also you also have many processes and exercises that people can actually use to to have an experience of what truly enables change, or what could disrupt yourself from being overly focused on the past or the present, or other things that keep you exactly where you are instead of being in the movement of change. And so, yeah, I'd really like to hear more about that. And I think you call it the lying exercise. So I don't know how you would like to introduce that, or if you'd like to go into the experience with me so that the viewers can have a sense of what it is, and then we talk afterwards about what the ingredients are. Where would you like to take this?
Well, maybe just to take you to my experiences that led to its discovery.
Yeah.
For many years, I also, as well as being an ecologist, worked as a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And we used to do sessions with people and worked on transformation and helping people change.
Yeah.
And I trundled along with this for many years with great success. But when I was driving along one day, I asked myself the question, maybe because it was getting a little boring for me. I said, what can I offer that's not available? And the thought that came to me, although I subsequently found it wasn't exactly true, the thought that came to me was, there's nowhere you can only go once. And so there have been people who've done single session therapy, but what I was thinking about was not a single session therapy that was aimed to bring about a certain change, but as an experience where you actually could only go and see the therapist once. And so the next person that came to me, I said, and I was on sabbatic leave, so I was very flexible. I said, you can come whenever you like, and the session can last as long as you like. And the only thing is, you'll only see me once.
Yeah.
And the person came and did an amazing session and worked on all sorts of things, including being raped and all sorts of things. And the person had come to me saying they wanted to work on not getting on with some people they were working with at work. Mm-hmm. They didn't come to work on rape and all sorts of other horrendous things.
Yeah.
And this only lasted under 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And I did many of these sessions, and only one out of hundreds went over 2 hours. Wow. And the person did phenomenal work on this, and they had actually been in Jungian analysis twice a week at $80 a shot for 2 years. And I discovered that afterwards, and I said to them, well, I guess you were able to work on that because you would have gone over that so many times with your analyst. And the person looked at me and said, oh, I've never mentioned any of that to the analyst. And I thought, wow, I wonder how common that is. Yeah. And then I did all these other sessions with people, and it was the norm. And what I discovered in this process was that I subsequently realized by saying I would only see this person once, mm-hmm. I was saying two things. This is your only chance, and I'm up to it. Yeah. And what I'm up to it meant for a person psychologically, without saying it, was I'm not going to let you die. And why that is important is most of the traumatic experience, most really important traumatic experiences we have are when we're very young, before we have language. Mm-hmm. And before we have language, we function very much like another animal that doesn't have language. And the tendency then is when you experience something negative, it's extrapolated to infinity, and infinity of a negative experience is death. And so deep in all our psyches are linked to our early traumatic experiences are that I might die. And so what happens in most conventional therapy is people go along and they work on something, and subconsciously they're actually checking out whether this person is up to working on the really important stuff, which means getting some communication from them that I'm not going to let you die if you work on whatever you want to work on. And most therapists never communicate that I'm not going to let you die. And so most people in therapy never actually get to work on the real heavy-duty traumatic experiences. So they work on peripheral things and quite often trivial things. So this is quite an extraordinary discovery.
Yeah.
Now, this was in my mind. I was wanting to work with larger groups of people, and I started working on change. And I was particularly interested in agriculture, and I was working on how do you change your farming operations to be more sustainable. And probably 15 years ago, in Central Australia, I was working with about 200 graziers or ranchers or farmers. And I was working on how they should, what they might do to make their operations more sustainable. And so I asked them in pairs to brainstorm what they do, and then we had a go round. And what they said was very disappointing and pitiful to me. And then I realized it was like what happens in a conventional therapy session. People work on trivia. And so without thinking about it, I just said, okay, go back into your pairs and boldly lie about how you have already made your whole operation completely sustainable as a bold lie. And the noise in the room was deafening. And then I had a go round, and the person who spoke first in the previous go-round had said that they'd put a solar collector on the body of water on his land to pump water. And as a lie, the same person said, and this is exactly what he said, 20 years ago, I put a nature strip right through my 200,000 hectare property. And I've been monitoring the bird species ever since. He said, I've got 200 species of birds. And then with a twinkle in his eye, he said, I got up to monitor those, to look at those birds this morning, because I like those birds. And then he said, you know those little bloody dinosaurs? I saw one of those bastards coming out of my nature strip. And I thought, wow, what's happened here? I mean, why the difference? And then I saw the difference, in a sense, was between me saying I'll see people only once, is people were able to fully access their total empowered, in the presence, fully aware self. Whereas when we were trying to think what we would say to be more sustainable, what that was being influenced by was what will people think about what I say? What will I be able to easily do it? And all those subconscious voices that say, no, you've never been able to do anything. You never do what you say you'll do. And anyway, you know, you couldn't say that in front of the neighbors. Whereas paradoxically, when you ask people to lie about what they've done, that they haven't actually done, there's no role for any censoring because it's a lie. And so you actually get to hear what your unwounded, fully empowered, fully aware, totally clear self is able to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then maybe I can explain the rest by us doing it, but
Yeah.
there's a way to then move on from that bold lie to a doable action to bring about meaningful change. And that, for me, is what really deep leadership is about,
Yeah.
is actually being able to enable that sort of change.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So thank you for this introduction and these two examples, because what I take from it is that what we actually do is we bypass that chatter in our head. We bypass all the reptilian brain type of flight, fight stuff that invites us all the time to look good, to say the right things, to make sure that others don't have a negative impression of us or anything like that. All that chatter that comes in between the creative flow, the creative process of what you're capable of doing or what you can envision that's possible. And also, what I really find fascinating is that people then get to the core of what truly matters. And I find that very important to help leaders lead change and to solve problems that really matter. And by having all this narrowing down, focus on trivial things, on focusing on what we know and polish that up, then we have a so-called perfect answer, but it doesn't help us evolve. It doesn't help us navigate new terrains. It doesn't help us create solutions that weren't there before. And so, it's very interesting to hear that in this situation, there's a bypass of all these so-called filters that help us to stay in a perceived safe space, but at the same time is keeping us stuck.
So, maybe it would help to just say one more thing about that example I gave. Is what I then asked the people in the workshop to do.
Yeah, the farmers,
was to brainstorm anything they'd actually done that had got anything to do with their lie. And all of them had done things. And this person had actually put in a row of trees between two fields. And had actually been noticing birds on the trees. And had actually been thinking, if I was a bird, I'd want more than one row of trees. And so he'd actually been doing the preliminary work to take next meaningful steps towards his lie. And that was my experience with everybody. And it's understandable that unwounded part of each of us is constantly trying to do meaningful things and is constantly being stopped from doing them by convention and fear and postponement and responding to all those critical voices that say you can't say that here, or you can't do that in our society, or whatever it is. So actually being able to connect with that part of each of us, both as individuals and as a society, as a collective process, actually gives us some hope for solving the sort of problems we talked about when we started.
Yeah.
So for me, it's very, very exciting.
Yeah. Well, it sounds very exciting to me too. I'd love to go into this process of what that looks like. And I think it could be very inspirational for everyone who's watching to see what that process actually looks like. And I have no idea. I didn't have a preset question that some people may have when they, or may have had when they came to your psychotherapy practice, or maybe the farmers in the room who had a preset idea of why they were there. But I don't have that, other than a healthy curiosity of towards this process, and to see how that relates to enabling true change. So I'm ready to start.
Well, one way to start is to do a practice lie.
Mm-hmm.
And
a practice lie. Okay.
Because I do this with my students when I'm teaching a subject, and we do a practice lie. And so they come into the classroom and I have them in pairs boldly lie about the healthy breakfast they had this morning.
Okay. So even if they had a healthy breakfast, what do they do then?
Well, if they had, I don't think very many people had a truly healthy breakfast. If they had a healthy breakfast, I would say, I would like you to boldly lie about the exercise program you carried out before you had your healthy breakfast. In detail, detail. Not, I did 10 push-ups, but a really ambitious program of healthy exercise.
Okay. And is that something that you want to do now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can. My list of possible things to try. If you thought, what is the most difficult conversation? So, what is the most difficult conversation you might think of having with your son or daughter, or your mother or father, or your sister or brother? Boldly lie about having had that conversation.
Mm-hmm. So that's another example of what people could.
Yeah, and I think most people have things that they haven't got around to talking with their children, or their sister, or their brother, or their mother, or father, or their partner with.
Yeah.
Most people don't have a healthy breakfast, and most people don't carry out a healthy, a really fully healthy exercise program before they have breakfast. So there's always plenty of things one can do. So those are things to keep in mind, which we could do now with you if you wanted to.
And I'm just thinking of the context of everyone who's watching. So many of us work in organizations as leaders, or as systems practitioners, or coaching consultants who want to support change in organizations. And we could do a personal one about healthy breakfast or exercise, because it's the startup phase of then the next step in this exercise, isn't it?
Yeah. The other thing that's really important is to be able to go with your absolute first thought.
Mm-hmm.
And just as the censoring thing is going on for most of us most of the time, it prevents us going with our first thought. And so to illustrate this, I usually tell the story of a parent whose daughter has been allowed to go to a party that went to midnight, and she had to be home by midnight. And she comes home at 2 a.m. And what the parents do is shout at her, "How could you come home at this time of the morning? You told me you'll be home by midnight." And I always say to them, well, what was the first thought? And of course, the first thought was, thank God she's safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what needed to be communicated to her, not, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? The most important thing to communicate is, thank God you're safe. I'm so glad you're safe. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you're here, alive, and so forth. Well, just in the same way, it's really hard to go with the first thought. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're used to going with second thoughts and third thoughts,
Yeah.
even 55th thoughts.
So what in the here and now would be a good place to start then? I have no idea.
Well, I think for people who are in an organization, there's always things that haven't been talked about in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are things that are not being done in the best possible way, that there possibly isn't an equitable or respectful or caring way of doing certain things. And 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 conversations about changing that often get postponed.
Yeah.
And you know, to imagine, in fact, it's much more powerful to lie that it's taken place. When we imagine that it's taken place, that's automatically subject to censoring,
Mm-hmm.
because imagining it is something that might happen in the future.
Yeah.
Lying about it having happened, because it's a lie about something that's already happened, it can't be censored.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
people often say to me, is there another thing we can call it instead of lying? Isn't it really imagining? And it's not imagining. It's actually, it only works as a bold, full-on lie about something that you've already done that you haven't actually done.
Mm. Okay.
So if there's anything you can think about that you would be willing to be on the program, that
Yeah,
would,
there's something that pops up for me.
okay.
Yeah, do you want me to share it, or how do I work with it?
There we go.
Um, well, something that so I
And
organize and
remember to
host.
do it. And remember to do it as a bold lie that I've already done this.
Oh, so I do. Okay. I thought I was going to say something about that I haven't done yet.
No, you're yes, it is something you haven't done yet, but you're talking to me about it as a lie that you've done it.
Okay. All right. Oh, that's difficult.
Yeah. It is difficult.
um. So I've run three summits about systemic leadership summit about systemic leadership. And I've been speaking to really prominent speakers, and it's enabled me to lead my own company in a systemic way, and to be a leader who is very much focused on the whole. And it has enabled me to work with clients in such a way that they can also be systemic leaders, and that we can create this ripple effect into the world that that I really want to accomplish through the summit. Um,
That I
so
have already achieved through the summit.
I've already achieved this through the summit. I set out in the beginning that I wanted to reach over 20,000 people, and I am at 31,924 people right now. So I've had this huge impact in the world, and it's just continuing and growing, and it's so much bigger than myself, which it already is. Um, and I have a perfect community where all the 31,000 people are intensely engaging, learning, implementing everything in their own organizations, and where we are now also seen by the bigger community when it comes to the environment, the political realm. We're also seen by other big influencers who want to actually join into this huge ripple effect that we are creating. I've been receiving invitations from the NBC and CNN, and I'm being interviewed by all these different people who have huge networks again and huge media to just spread the word across the world. So I find myself in a very fortunate place.
Fantastic. Now, a real test when you've told a really good, bold lie,
yeah,
is then after saying it, go, ha
ha ha!
Yeah. So that you need to practice a little. So, ha practicing the ha
yeah.
Is something to do, probably driving along in a car is a great place to practice ha because you can do it really loud and not be worried about anybody being offended by your loud ha. So there's a lot of difference between ha and ha, and so that's something to practice, because it's, just like all the things we talked about before as testing questions for well-being and trust and so forth. That ha is something that's a real test for a really bold lie that is over the top, So
so is it about the more over the top and uncontrolled haha is that it's a test of how big the lie was, or I'm not sure.
It's a test of how much you're in the present, because and how much you're coming from your full empowered, aware, vision, clear, and so forth self. The minute or the degree to which there's been any censoring going on is what interferes with the ha. So in that sense, it's a measure of how it is. So there were several points when you were saying your lie that I wanted to enlarge it a bit. So I wouldn't in any way limit it to any number of people. Everybody in the world is familiar with my approach. I'm being pursued by every media outlet that there is in the world. In fact, I'm being offered all the awards that one could be offered, even the Nobel Prize for my contribution to leadership transformation. So you're getting the idea of how bold I'm encouraging. I mean, as a coach, I'm encouraging people to be completely over the top with not a smidgen of holding back. So let's go to the next step, because I think you're understanding what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm understanding what you're saying. I'm not sure if I can do that. Well, but anyway.
It does. That's where a coach is helpful, because we're a social species. We're not here to do things on our own. We're here to do things collectively, and this is where coaching is really important.
I do have a question though. Yeah. When doing this really big, bold lie, is it something that you should actually want? Is it about something that you actually want? Or is it just blown up? Because I don't know if I want every media to.
No, I was just giving this as an example of of how unlimited that thinking can be.
Mm-hmm.
And any paring it down to something that's sort of reasonable is what, in a way, is an indicator of that we're still censoring ourselves in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a lot of practice, because we've spent our whole life, moment to moment, being censored. So I'm asking you, anybody I'm working with, for the first time in their life, possibly as an adult, to actually not be censored in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can go into that, it naturally goes to something that your core being wants. It's not that you've got to think what I want. It's to like in your work that you do with enabling transformative leadership, is boldly lie about, as you did, about enabling that change. And to think, how would I know if I've actually enabled meaningful transformative leadership? What would be the indicators of that? And to boldly lie about how you've actually achieved that, how you've witnessed those indicators. You may be disappointed sometimes in the degree to which the work you do brings about change. So in lying about that, you would lie about how you actually have achieved that, what you haven't actually yet achieved.
Yeah.
That's what a lie is. Then the next step in that is to reflect on what you actually have done. So part of what you spoke about are actually what you have done. Mm-hmm. You've been running these amazing sessions, and as you are doing with me at the moment,
yeah,
on to enable transformative leadership and to bring an awareness of that, the importance of that whole area, into as wide a frame as possible.
Yeah.
So if I was doing that with a person who I wasn't familiar with what they've done, I would have them then reflect on what they've done, what they've actually done, not the lie, but what they've actually done.
Yeah, but I can speak to what I've actually done.
Okay.
So that's what I can do is, so I ran 3 systemic leadership summits. And we have about 4,000 people who participated. And I think the number of interviews is around 62 now in total. I did facilitate engagement around the participants, amongst the participants, to talk about their learning, and that's something that I encourage everyone to do, and I will at the end of this session as well. And I've been able to elicit some engagement, but not to the big extent that I really wanted it to be. I keep experimenting with platforms in order to facilitate that. As we speak, I opened up a new one to allow for more different ways to engage. I've written articles about the different sessions. I had someone else help me with writing articles. We've had a few publications in Forbes.com, a couple of posts about systemic leadership related topics. I've had some collaborations with speakers. I've met some participants in different contexts, which was also great. I've developed a framework based on all the summits to work with clients with that. I am experiencing that it's not easy to be very explicit about that, because I think that many leaders are not ready for that terminology yet. So I've been reframing it and rephrasing it so that it's easier for people to understand what systemic leadership can do for creating real change and working on the things that really matter in their organizations and for themselves as leaders.
This is sort of taking us into the next step. So maybe we could go to the next step. And I just want to say a big, big appreciation and thank you for what I've witnessed of what you're doing, because it's been fantastic seeing you in action and experiencing you in action today. So it's what I call delicious.
Well, thank you. And I before we go to the next step, I do want to say something about it, and that is, I feel like the dot in the big circle right now when it comes to what I'm trying to accomplish and what I've actually been able to do. So I do feel kind of shaken right now. And it's not that I'm not appreciative of what I've been able to accomplish, or with everyone who's been involved and who attended the summit and the speakers for their contributions. I'm very grateful for everyone who's been involved in this big journey, the way they have been and the way they are at this moment. And but I'm also like, there's so much more to do to actually get to the place where my vision or my big lie or whatever, however we want to call it, where I love it to be. So that's where I find myself now.
Well, I think that's great, and it's great that you recognize that, and it's it's a bit frightening, but and belittling in some ways, but it's also incredibly hopeful. And sometimes with clients at this point, I have them say something to me to contradict that feeling of being just that little dot, and I'll say to you. So say to me, I'm Jennifer, and you're pleased to meet me.
Okay, I'm Jennifer, and you're pleased to meet me.
And I am pleased to meet you.
Yeah.
So I would like you to just reflect on, all those things you said you've done, which some of which I was very familiar with.
Yeah.
And what would be a next doable step that would take some courage towards your lie? And again, coming up with your first thought. It doesn't matter what it is.
Okay. My first thought is to, before the end of our conversation, I just really want everyone who's watching to engage, because I know that with these sessions, a lot is going on for everyone. And I want everyone to be so much more vocal about it. So please share what your experience is. Even if you're watching this or just the process about the lying, I mean, I am in it. I'm in the present right now. I don't know where this is going to end up. And I have that much more often in these type of sessions with speakers. I'm here because I really want more systemic leadership in the world. And I really want you to engage with this, with me, with each other, with the speakers, with your outside world to really bring the value out and unpack it. That's why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this because it's because I don't have anything else to do. It's for you. So please engage. Just be vocal about whatever these sessions elicit in you or do for you, and how you can translate it in your own life or organizations or teams or whatever the context that you're working in. So that's what I want to say. That's what I want to do.
Fantastic. Well, just to carry this through as an example, for example, one possibility of you experiencing this right now is to think of somebody who's special to you in your life, and to make a commitment to tell them about what happened in this session and about this lying process, and to share it with one other person. You know, that's a doable action. And to make a commitment to, this is something I'm actually going to do. I'm going to tell such and such a person about what happened today and share it with them. Why that is important is in the process of you telling them, you're actually telling them something that is precious for you. And about you, and possibly sharing something about you that you may have not shared with them ever before. What happens commonly in change processes, people dream up an action that is what I call an Olympic action. And there are very few people who can engage in the Olympics. And most things that make people make a commitment to or have a thought to carrying out in a workshop, they actually don't carry out. Because of those influencing voices that say, oh, you should do this, and you know, and then in front of people they'll say, oh yes, I'll do this. And then when they come out of the workshop, the other voices say, oh, you're never going to do it, just like you never do anything else.
Well, this is recorded, what I just said.
Exactly.
And two, I'm not going to edit this out. So everyone who's watching this, you're a witness now that what I said is actually what I wanted to say to you. And two, what's interesting is that after this session, I'm going to meet up with another Systemic Leadership Summit speaker. She's been on the summit before, and she happens to be in my country. So we're going to have lunch, and I'm going to tell her. It's plain and simple. So I can commit to that.
Fantastic. So what would normally happen in a larger workshop? I would use what's called Levine's force field analysis. And Levine was the father of social psychology. And he said, if you want to change, you need to identify the driving forces and add to them and strengthen them, and identify the restraining forces and weaken and remove them, like the barriers. And so in a workshop, if it was dealing with a political issue or an environmental issue or a health issue, I would ask people, what would enable you to take that action, like you sharing it with another person? And I deliberately gave that as an example because it's like I already know it's a doable action. But you might have said, well, I want to get this process accepted on some media platform that it presently isn't available on. And I would say, in using Levine's force field analysis, what might enable you to get it on that platform? And what would it take to get the things? It might mean phoning somebody up, or meeting with somebody, or getting getting funding, or designing a plan, or so forth. What might get in the way? What would the barriers be? And some of those are internal barriers like fear and postponement patterns, and some of them external like lack of funding, or that I haven't found the person's email address yet, or whatever it is. And then what I do in those workshops is bring it down to a doable action that you can 100% make a commitment to carrying out.
Yeah.
And so the one you came up with, in some ways, I sort of coached you to come up with one that is a 100% doable one. Quite often, people will still say they'll do something that actually they're not going to do, because they're still trying to say something that looks good in front of the others.
Yeah.
And so I keep very strongly saying, so you absolutely 100% guarantee you'll do that. And quite often people say, well, 99.999. And I say, I have no interest in 99 point recurring 9 commitment. I'm only interested in absolutely 100% commitment.
Yeah.
So whatever you can make 100% commitment to is the thing to make a commitment to. And the other thing that's quite useful is to think of who would be an ally to you in carrying out that commitment.
Yeah.
And that's partly because we're a social organism, and we really important to make a relational connection to somebody else in terms of carrying out what we need to carry out.
Yeah.
And again, in our society, which overemphasizes individualism, we so much of the time feel we've got to do it alone.
Yeah.
And so in everything I do, I'm actually contradicting the patterns of behavior that are keeping us imprisoned and disempowered and inappropriately behaving. And so, identifying an ally and asking the ally is a really important thing to do, just as it is to absolutely commit to something you really can carry out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is genuinely transformational, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And I can tell from my own experience right now, as we were doing this, because my next question was going to be about why is this so disruptive, or how does this enable change? But from my experience just now, what I'm noticing is that by just blurting out this big lie and haha afterwards is, how do I phrase that? It's like the freeing up of, like when there's something suppressed or when something is censored, it's like it can just burst out like that, and it doesn't matter how it comes out, because it's a lie anyway. So
yeah.
It brings a lot of life force
Absolutely
out. And
yeah.
Then when you reconnect with that life force, and then in the next step, bring it to, okay, what am I actually going to do, or what did I do so far, and what is the next step towards this, then because I said it out loud, it's out there as possibilities. It's no longer locked up in some sort of censored place where there's no verbalization or no explicit expression of what this actually is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's part of my experience just now of
and I think when you reflect on this, it's connected to everything that's meaningful. It's like so much what goes on is that we're getting ready to do something meaningful.
Yeah.
And to then imagining this isn't getting ready for it, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. It's not like I'm getting ready for it. This is it. And that's why my one session therapy worked, because this was it.
Yeah.
And why the line thing works and why the aha works. And the other thing that is a helpful thing to do that is an environmentally supportive thing, is to try and reflect on a place in nature that early in your life, ideally before age 7 to 11, that was a special place for you, a place that you went where you can remember what it looked like, the trees, the river, the plants, the animals, the smell, the associations with it, to think of that and anchor that, and to always, when you're in a situation where you need to be in the present, is to also have that place from the past as a place in juxtaposition to the present. And that's because that time in our lives was, for most of us, before we gave up on being who we are.
Okay.
Fully connected. And some psychologists say, we have a switch between before 7 to 11 to after 7 to 11, where we switch from living from the inside out to living from the outside in.
Yeah.
Or living in response to those voices, those censoring voices. So if you can anchor a place that's before you gave up on yourself, on your full self, it's really, really powerful. And you can use it. You can use that in doing this lying exercise, and you can also do it in every situation where you're faced with a challenge. If you're faced with somebody who really gets up your nose, is to go to that place. If you're trying to get to sleep and you can't get to sleep, go to that place and you'll fall asleep. If you're sitting in the dentist chair and thinking, oh, I hate the dentists and going to the dentist, go to that place while you're sitting in the dentist chair or having an operation before you become anesthetized. And when you come out of the anesthetic, access to that place is an incredibly empowering connection to maintain.
Yeah. What I actually hear you say when you say what are the important things that you do when you reflect back on the process is you capture the three layers again of your personal power and the social power by telling someone, and the environment by bringing in the environment where there's not so much self-censoring going on, and where there's a lot of authenticity and true self as a source to deal with whatever you need to deal with in the present moment. So these three that we discussed before are coming back in reflection as I hear you share that.
It's so delicious talking with you, Jennifer, because of your attentiveness and your awareness and your reflectiveness and your being there and paying, noticing and reflecting and making sense of it. And you are indeed a rare person.
Oh, well, so, thank you. Thank you. What was it again? I'm Jennifer Campbell, and you're delighted to meet me. I have one more question.
Okay.
Because we are at our time boundary, or crossed our time boundary also for this conversation, but I do not want to cut it off because it's such a rich conversation. But right after this, I'm going to have lunch with my speaker and share with her what I experienced here. And that is, when you look at this particular lying exercise, and the one-off sessions, just the one-time sessions, but also the bigger realm that you work and live in with the ecological lens, how did that affect your life?
Um, well, in lots and lots of ways. In some ways, when I reflect on my life, I think I've been incredibly privileged. And then if I reflect on it more deeply, part of that sort of sense of being privileged has actually been that whereas quite a lot of other people have wondered about doing things,
Mm-hmm.
I've actually done them.
Yeah.
So, for example, I have a practice every day. I communicate with somebody who I've never communicated with before. So it might be somebody whose paper I've read, or somebody I heard on the radio or saw on the television. And instead of, as most people, they think, oh, that was interesting, I actually contact that person. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's given me an incredibly rich life.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I had the most powerful feedback one could have. I was overdoing it and got very tired and was, busy saving the world. And on my way driving in Canada to the next place to give a workshop, and
Yeah.
I fell asleep at the wheel of the car.
Oh.
The car, in the process of falling asleep, I pushed my foot down as far as it would go on the accelerator, and the car must have sped up, and it hit the back of a truck.
Oh no.
It flew up the road. And at that moment, I was absolutely sure I was going to die.
Hmm.
And my only thought was, life's been so good. And I just laughed. And so I didn't think, I never got to do this or I should have done that. The only thing that happened at the moment I was going to die, I was sure I was going to die, was appreciation and gratitude.
Yeah.
What a gift to be given.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that was the feedback on the life I've had,
Yeah.
which has been that I've met some of the greatest people in the world, and I was a psychotherapist to a royal family once, and I've worked with the person who was the leader in the world in a number of areas. The
Mm-hmm.
person who I went to work with at the first university where I got a job
Mm-hmm.
was the person who opened up the whole field of life in the soil.
Mm.
And and I wrote to him and I said, I've selected you to work with next. So I didn't say, have you got a job? So that whole process of connecting with your fully empowered self
Mm-hmm.
actually enables phenomenal things to happen. And
Yeah.
so I've had that incredible beneficial experience. And my partner that I'm in relationship with now is the most amazing person in the world.
Yeah.
And so I have to pinch myself daily that she wants to be with me as much as I want to be with her. So, so and my kids, my two children, are just the most amazing children, and I could go on and on. It's that, like, life has given me so many gifts, and every day they stream in amazing ways,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Wow.
So I am Stuart, and you're pleased to meet me.
Yeah. I am pleased to meet you, and it's been an honor and also a lot of fun to be speaking with you today. And I am certain that many people who are watching felt a shift in themselves as well as they were watching. So I think that in this conversation we've been able to co-create some change in the bigger realm the Systemic Leadership Summit as it is now. And yeah, I just really want to thank you, Stuart, for this conversation and this interaction, also for leading me through the lying exercise process, but also sharing from your experience about ecology and what enables true change and what are the key principles and viewpoints that you also hold from that wider lens, so that we can enable true change and work on the things that truly matter to us. I mean, life is really short. We've been talking about life and death in this
Yeah.
conversation too, and I think that one of the things that I'm taking away is that life is short, and that I want to scream "ha ha" a little bit more loudly and boldly and more openly and less controlled. So thank you so much for being on.
Well, thank you for having this conversation with me. I couldn't imagine a better person to have this conversation with than you, Jennifer. So deep appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you. And to everyone who's watching, I can just reiterate what I said before. I hope that it was an inspiration to you. It was that it's an onset for you to enable change in your life, in your organization, and even in the bigger environment of that. And there's our online platform. And again, the invitation to share your learning, share your responses, share your ideas, share what's happening when you are doing your big lie and laughing out loud. Because what comes underneath is what truly matters to all of us. So thank you so much for watching. Looking forward to seeing you there on the online platform. Take care. Bye-bye.